So I'm now going to take you through where we are. Following publication of that panel report, that was the end of March 2020, the Federal Environment Minister, Minister Wilkinson at the time, he's no longer the Environment Minister, he's now Minister of Natural Resources, and Stephen Gilbert is the Environment Minister. He asked the port for some additional information, a range of topics, but importantly, he was concerned about the wildlife, biofilm, and a number of other key areas. He asked for that additional information August 24, 2020. The port then spent a year developing that material. They held closed-door workshops. Invited to those workshops were the First Nations that were interested and Department of Fisheries. But they excluded Environment and Climate Change Canada. Now, these folks are the regulators. That's where the science comes from. But they weren't invited, nor did they attend. There were a number of workshops. I happened to gain access to some of that material, so I could see what was going on. They worked through the various key aspects of the Terminal 2 proposal. And they then, the port then submitted their additional information 13 months later. It actually went in on September 24, 2021, right after the federal election. And it disappeared from view. That additional information didn't go public until December 13, 2021, when it suddenly went up onto the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 registry. Now, I should explain that the Impact Assessment Agency has this registry. I'm going to be showing you a link later on where you can go on it. It contains all of the information about Roberts Bank Terminal 2. And it had been largely silent, sitting dormant, since August 24, when Minister Wilkins asked for the additional information. And importantly, at that stage, he paused the decision process. And because of the legislation, that decision process has a timeline associated to it. By pausing it, he therefore paused that timeline. Then a week afterwards, the Impact Assessment Agency, which is a division of Environment and Climate Change Canada, published draft conditions for approval, announced a public comment period with a closing date of February 13, 2021. So, looking at a decision which is clearly going to be coming very quickly, how is that decision informed? Well, it is informed under environmental assessment legislation, but not the current legislation. The port asked, and Ottawa agreed, that this decision be carried out under the previous legislation, Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012. And for those of you who follow politics, as I do, that was a Stephen Harper little mastermind. It removed a number of provisions protecting the environment. But we are where we are. So that is where that is the legislation the decision will be made under. And it's the Environment Minister who has that initial responsibility. And he'll make that decision based on the panel report, the additional information that the port provided, which we got to see a little less than a month ago, internal consultation, and in theory, the public comments, which we are now allowed to submit. So that decision will be based on whether the project will result in significant adverse environmental effects, and whether the draft conditions, which, as I mentioned, Ottawa has just published, those effects can be mitigated so that the environment and the wildlife are not impacted. If the minister decides the decision is negative, i.e. there are significant adverse environmental effects and they can't be mitigated, then he sends that to the Governor and Council, which is actually the federal cabinet, and then they decide if those adverse effects are justified in the circumstances. Now, I should just pause here for a moment. There was a decision earlier this year, somewhere around June, I think, on another port project, this time in Quebec. And the feds did indeed decide that there were adverse effects, they can't be mitigated, and it turned it down. And I have been using that as an example of where they should be going with Roberts Bank Terminal 2. But as it may, that's where we are now at. And the public comment period closes February 13, a few short weeks away. And best guess is that decision is likely to come shortly after that public comment period closes. So what's been going on behind the closed doors? Because there has been a lot. Environment Canada and the scientists have been in a backwards and forwards discussion. The scientists continue to suggest that the port's additional information doesn't alleviate any environment concerns. The scientists have said all along that because of Terminal 2 and that man-made island, which is huge, out on Roberts Bank, it will disrupt the salinity trigger, and it is that trigger that shocks the marine-type diatoms into the high acid, fatty acid production, and it negatively impacts the quality and quantity. And this is crucial to the migrating shorebirds, especially the western sandpipers. And if you've been out there April, May, you see them come through on their way north to their breeding grounds. And they're here for 4 or 5 days. They feed on that biofilm. It is essential to get them to their breeding grounds. There are no other sources of biofilm available, despite what the port will tell you. And both Environment Canada and peer-reviewed studies have shown that biofilm cannot be created on a scale necessary to compensate for what will be lost. The Port Authority says it can. There is no evidence. In fact, there's lots of evidence to suggest it cannot. So while all of this has been going on, the Port Authority has been lobbying. They have a senior management employee located in Ottawa, and the lobbying has been extensive. The port's also been signing participation agreements with First Nations, and quite recently, several of them have come out in the public comments supporting the project. Surprise, surprise. Environment Canada, the scientists want their concerns made public and have them submitted on the public registry, and they have sent them to Ottawa for approval and publication. Now, I should let you into a little secret, which I discovered through 2 Freedom of Information requests
Roger,
that I put in.
Roger, I'm sorry to interject. It's Sid here.
Yeah.
We're closing in on 8 o'clock. Could you move to wrap up, please?
Yeah.
We've got a couple
Yeah.
minutes left.
Yep. So those 2 access to information requests show that indeed Ottawa has been meddling with the science. The scientists want that information made public. The draft conditions for approval that allow Terminal 2 to proceed will by no means stop the anticipated declines in biofilm availability. We're going to be looking at wildlife population declines, perhaps towards species extinction. So what can you do? In simple terms, start writing. Write to the minister. The email address for the minister is right there. Write to your MP. Tell them that you want this project stopped. Last but not least, there is lots of further information on the Against Port Expansion website. That's the email address. Look there and you'll have all the information you need to write in and get this project stopped. This is the last opportunity. If Ottawa decides to approve this port, you can say goodbye to the environment, the wetlands, and the wildlife on Roberts Bank. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks very much, Roger. And Roger, you've indicated that the slides that you were speaking from tonight can be made available to all members if they want them. And this meeting is being recorded as well. So, and I'm sure if people wanted to contact you directly by email for advice on lobbying the federal government, I'm sure you'd be receptive to that, Roger.
Of course. Last name, EMSLEY at axion.net, AXION.net.
And we're all in awe of the tremendous amount of work you've done on this crusade. And we thank you very much for outlining the status of the project tonight.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Roger.
Thanks.
Over to you.